Okay.
I did go to the lake this week though. We went camping for like most of the weekend. It's pretty fun.
Yeah? Did you read Hosea while you were down there?
No.
Shame on you. Okay. Alright. We are going to try to make it through the first 3 chapters of Hosea. Fair warning, I am awful at going quickly.
Jeff read the first 3 chapters, so we're going to be okay.
Did you read it 3 times and take notes on the 3rd time?
No.
Okay, it's going to go over your head just a little bit.
Dang it.
We are going to be cruising really, really quickly, and we're going to try to make some application at the end. So let's jump right in and start reading. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea the son of Beeri in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah, in the days of Jeroboam the son of Joash, king of Israel. This was a very profitable time for the kingdom of Israel. They were living in a time of luxury. They had plenty of food, plenty of work. They were just very fat, if you want to call it that way. Call it that. They were very fat and healthy and happy during this time.
You had a notebook. You have a notebook.
A notebook?
Or a piece of paper.
I don't.
I do.
Okay. Running into 2. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go take to yourself a wife of whoredom and have children of whoredom. Blank commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord." So he went and he took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. The first thing right out of the gate that God tells Hosea to do as a prophet is go marry a prostitute. Go marry a prostitute. The very first thing right out of the gate. What does Hosea do with that?
He goes and follows what he was commanded.
He doesn't even protest. You're right. He doesn't even protest. He just does it. So right out of the gate, Hosea does what God says. All right. Right out of the gate. Doesn't even argue. Jonah, whenever Jonah was told what to do, Jonah put up an argument. He thought he had an argument. And if anybody had an argument to try to protest against what God told them to do, it seems like Hosea would have had a leg to stand on in that argument. But he doesn't. He just does it. And there's a lesson for us right there. When God tells us what to do, we should just do it. Don't protest. Don't think you know better than God. Just do it. And for that to be the first thing right out of the gate he's called to do as a prophet is impressive, that right out of the gate he did what God said, even though it wasn't an easy thing to do. And the Lord said to him, "Call his name," the child's name, "Jezreel, for in just a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." Adeline and I talked a little bit about the kind of unique usage of the words in here. It's a throwback to what happened with Jehu at Jezreel, and there's a lot of interesting history there in that passage. In verse 6, she conceived again and bore a daughter. What's different this time from up here in verse 3?
Girl.
Okay, it's a girl. What else?
It doesn't say it's Hosea's.
Hosea's name isn't mentioned. Okay, up in verse 3 it says, "He went and he took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him, Hosea, a son." In verse 6 it says, "She conceived again and bore a daughter." Hosea's not in there. So there is, and especially from the name that God calls this child, very, very, very strong likelihood, if we can't be extremely positive, that this isn't Hosea's daughter. Okay, this is someone else's child that his wife is having. And God said to him, "Call her name No Mercy, for I will no more have mercy on the house of Israel to forgive them at all. But I will have mercy on the house of Judah, and I will save them by the Lord their God. I will not save them by bow or by sword or by war or by horses or by horsemen." If you read 2 Kings 19, 35 and 36, that's whenever you can see this come to fruition. Whenever Sennacherib had Hezekiah, the king of Judah, trapped like a bird in a cage in Jerusalem. His massive army had surrounded Jerusalem. The angel of the Lord struck down 180-some thousand soldiers in one night. Just massive kill-off. 180-some thousand soldiers. It was done by the power of God. It wasn't done by a bow or a sword or by war or by horses or horsemen. God is the one that did it. There's no doubt about it. So we can see that God staved off the destruction of Jerusalem because they were obedient to God. See, Israel, we talked about it last week, they didn't have a single godly king. They had no periods, if you'll call them that, of godliness, where they threw out the idols and they only worshiped God. Judah, on the other hand, did have periods of godliness where they served God throughout the idols. They had several rounds, if you want to call that, like the period of the judges, where they would go from worshiping God, they would go back to idolatry, and then they would swing back. Because of their periods of godliness, we're in Hosea 1 trying to motor through it. God saved them. In verse 8, when she had weaned no mercy, she conceived and bore a son. What's missing again? Hosea. Hosea is not in there. This is not Hosea's son. And the Lord said, call his name not my people, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. If you go back to Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus, where God entered into the covenant relationship with the people of Israel, God called them his people. You will be my people, and I will be your God. He is saying that is no longer true here. I am not your God. You are not my people, because they have failed that to hold up their end of that covenant relationship repeatedly throughout their history. Whenever we compared this to marriage last week, and why marriage is such a good example of a parallel with a covenant relationship with God, what is the only way to get out, the only God-approved way to get out of a marriage besides death? Adultery. Absolutely right. In this case, they had committed adultery repeatedly, and they were not going to turn away from committing that spiritual adultery. So they are no longer husband and wife. God is no longer their God. They're no longer his people. The same way that someone that's divorced for unrepentant adultery, a husband can look at his wife and say, you are no longer my wife, and I'm no longer your husband. The same way, God is breaking that relationship with them right here. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, children of the living God. And the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and they shall appoint for themselves one head. And they shall go up from the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. What are we talking about here, guys?
The church.
We're talking about the church, okay? This is a prophecy of the church coming into existence. We can prove that because go back to the beginning here of this passage in 10. The children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea. Yes, okay, and we find out that the promise of Abraham was ultimately fulfilled whenever Christ became the head of the church. We find that out in Galatians. You're right. That's a good connection there. It should be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. In the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, children of the living God. Whenever we become a Christian, we go from being someone who is not one of the people of God to becoming people of the living God. So, we're children of the living God. The children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together. This is where you can really start to see that this is talking about the church. When do you see Israel and Judah come together?
Did you say when?
Mm-hmm.
My first guess is for worship.
Okay. But for them to come together for worship, what would have to happen?
Well, Acts 2.
Okay. Acts 2. Very, very good. You never throughout history, from this point of Hosea being written to the establishment of the church, you never see Israel and Judah come together. It just doesn't happen throughout history. They never unite back together as a people. But whenever the church is established and it started being taught, then both people from the nation of Judah and the nation of Israel became Christians. And at that point, they became united as one people. And they had God as their head. They shall appoint for themselves one head. I just stole my thunder. The one head is Christ. In Ephesians 5, we see that Christ is the head of the church. So this is Jesus being the head of the people that are united out of Judah and Israel. And they shall go up from the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. There is no, bigger day in history of humankind outside of the day of the crucifixion and the day of the resurrection than the establishment of the church. Okay? That period right there is the climax of human history. Jesus being crucified, resurrected, and the church being established all happened within a very short period, and that is the climax of human history. It is what everybody is waiting for and everybody is looking back to since that point. Breaking into chapter 2. Say to your brothers, you are my people, and to your sisters, you have received mercy. Now, right here in verse 2, we are going to talk both to Gomer and Israel simultaneously.
What's Ami? Is that like a person? Because mine says Ami in it on verse 1 on chapter 2.
Mercy. It means mercy. Whenever you go back up here to verse 6 in chapter 1, call her name No Mercy. That's literally in Hebrew, Lo Ami. No mercy. So whenever you say Ami up here, you've received mercy.
Okay.
In verse 2, he's talking about the Gomer and Israel here. Plead with your mother, to his children in this case. Plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. That she put away her whoring from her face, and her adultery from between her breasts. Real quick, if you are trying to look very intently at something, where do you put it? Alright, you get it pretty close to your face, right? If you really want to investigate something, you put it up close to your face. They're really putting it in front of themselves. And if you ever do defensive tactics training or anything fun like that, if you are, alright, let's use an example that you use in defensive tactics training. If you are really trying to be strong with something, let's say you're trying to open a jar of pickles. What do you do with that jar of pickles?
You try to get it off.
Wow. That's true. Let's get a little bit more detailed than that, though. How do you try to...
Close to your body and then...
Okay, there you go. Whenever you open a jar of pickles, you don't hold it way out here and go, ooh, as hard as you can. You don't have strength out here. You pull it in close because you have a lot more power and control in close. When you're doing defensive tactics training, there's a saying that is contact equals control. If you have a hold of something and you can get it close to your body, you have contact with your body, you can control it. Distance equals escape. If you're trying to fight somebody out here, you need to just break off and get back and either re-engage or go somewhere else. Do something else because it's not working out for you there. But contact equals control. In this point, whenever it's talking about putting her adultery from between her breasts, she's putting it close to her core, okay, where your heart's located as well. She has adultery in the very center of her being. It is what is the most dear to her. If you have a child, none of you guys in here have children yet except me, but if you have a child and you were scared that they were going to get hurt or killed or something happened and you're trying to hold them, you take them in your arms and you squeeze them close to your body. This is what is happening here. She's taken adultery and she's bringing it close to her being. She's squeezing it close to her. She's holding it close to her. It is the closest thing to her right now because of where she's put it. In verse 3, lest I strip her naked and make her as in the day she was born, make her like a wilderness, make her like a parched land, and kill her with thirst. Okay, if you are not fully clothed, let's be tactful here, but if you are not fully clothed and someone tries to open the door into the room where you're at, what is the first thing you do?
Hide.
Okay, you're in the middle of the room. You can't hide. What do you do? Okay, you do this weird little dance where you try to cover yourself up as best you can. but you really can't, right? Because you don't have adequate clothing on to hide your shamefulness. You don't want people to see you naked. In verse 3, what he's talking about, if she doesn't take the whoring away from her face and close to her chest, she will be stripped naked. I will strip her naked and make her as in the day she was born, uncovered, where you can see everything about that person. Make her like a wilderness, make her like a parched land, and kill her with thirst. Okay, this is not something you want to be called. Okay, we think of the wilderness as kind of a good thing, right? We can go out and hike and hunt and stuff like that. But a wilderness, at this point, is an untamed land. Okay, it's something that is just wild and out of control. A parched land is worthless. It's not going to grow anything good. There's nothing in a parched, dry land but death, because it's cracked open. And kill her with thirst. Okay, this is going to be the end result of her sin if Israel and Gomer do not forsake sin and come back to God. They're going to be stripped naked, they're going to be exposed, and they're going to be helpless. And their wildness and the death that they have attached themselves to is going to be exposed. Upon her children also I will have no mercy, because they are children of whoredom. For their mother... All right, hold on, I need to go back for a second. On that part, is there a difference between a child, between two married people, and a child from those born in an affair?
Yes.
Yes, there is. Okay, they're both a child, right? And so they're both fully human. They both have a soul. But you try to take somebody and, well, let's put it this way. Let's say a king has a child with his queen, and then he has a child with a mistress. They're both sons. They're both about the same age. Which one's going to get the throne?
The one he had with the queen.
Exactly. All right. And in the same case, go back to Abraham. Who got the inheritance of Abraham? Was it Isaac, who he had with his wife, or was it Ishmael that he had with Hagar? It was Isaac, the one he had with his wife, instead of the one he had with a handmaiden. So you can see that there's a difference between a child born to a legitimate marriage and a child born from prostitution. There's a difference there. They don't have the same inheritance. They don't have the same rights, if you will. So upon her children I will have no mercy, because they are the children of whoredom. So the kids here are a product of their idolatry of their parents, both from Israel and from Gomer. For their mother has played the whore. She who conceived them has acted shamefully, for she said, I will go after my lovers, who will give me my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink. Is there a difference between fornication that results in a pregnancy and other sin? Okay.
Wait, what?
Is there a difference between fornication or adultery that results in a pregnancy and other sin? We got to know. Yes and no. Okay? No, in the sense that all sin does separate you from God. Okay? Sin is equal on that footing. But no, in the sense that if I think something that I shouldn't think and sin against God by doing that, there's a difference between that
And the action.
and
What you're talking about?
no, we're going to get to it in a second. Fornication that ends up in a pregnancy. Because what happens whenever someone sees an unmarried woman walking around that's pregnant? Her sin is evident. Her sin is in front of people's eyes. If you can see, in our culture, you have a wedding ring if you're married, right? If you see a woman walking around that doesn't have a wedding ring, and she is a full round 9 months pregnant, you can go, barring something that went horribly wrong, like her husband dying and her taking her ring off as a part of mourning, which I haven't ever seen that happen. That right there, that pregnancy is a result of a sinful action. You can see that. The same way that if you see two men holding hands and kissing in public, there's a difference between that and other sin because you can see that there's evidently a sinful action taking place. The sinful thought in my mind that I think when I'm by myself and no one else knows about it, it's hidden. But in this case, a product of prostitution, a child being born, when there shouldn't be a child being born, is evidence of sinful action. So in this case, God is using this to say the children are a product of whoredom. Their mother has played the whore. She who has conceived them has acted shamefully. And you can tell that because she's having kids when she shouldn't be, with someone that she shouldn't be. So the sin is evident. It's out there for everybody to see. For she said, I will go after my lovers who give me my bread, my water, my wool, my flax, my oil, and my drink. She's chasing after the people that she thinks are giving her something, that are giving her the things that she wants. God says, I will hedge up her way with thorns. I will build a wall against her that she cannot find her paths. She shall pursue her lovers, but not overtake them. She shall seek them, but not find them. Then she shall say, I will go and return to my first husband, for it was better for me then than now. In Amos chapter 4, God goes through a detailed list of what he did to the people of Israel, trying to get them to come back to God. He sent them famine. He sent them hard times, hoping that they would have that hard time come, realize that he's the one that sends good things to them, and they would come back to him. And they refused. They ended up clinging tighter to their idolatry because they refused to see who was giving them the good things that they desired. In this case, she's going after the wrong people. Who's giving her the wool, the bread, the water, the flax, the oil, and the drink? God, okay? In James 1:17 it says that all good and perfect gifts come down from the Father of lights. God is the one that gives us anything good that we have. And we can see that in verse 8 here too. She did not know that it was I, God, who gave her the grain, the wine, the oil, who lavished on her silver and gold, which they used for Baal. She got all the good things that she had in her life from God, the same way that we get any good thing we have in our life from God. And she turned around and used it for idol worship. We can be guilty of the same thing. Even though we don't have an idol, we fall down and worship. We can take the good things that God gives us and we can use them for the wrong purposes, sinful purposes. In this case, Gomer, among everything else that she's using that God gave her, is using the body that God gave her and the ability to have sex, which God gave her, intended for her husband, and she's using those things for sinful action, sinful reasons, sinful motivations. We can do the very same thing with our bodies, the same ability that God gave us, and all the other things in our life. Anything good that God gives us, we can use for the wrong reason if we're not careful. We need to make sure that God is the focus of our life, not all these other things. Otherwise, we'll be abusing what God has given us. And just for a second in verse 8, think about how big of a slap in the face it is to God whenever he gave Gomer all these good things and she turned around and used them to worship an idol. It's just a big old slap in the face to God. It just really is. Instead of paying homage to God who gave the things to her, she's taking those things that God gave her and using them to worship something that isn't even a God, just a piece of rock or metal. Verse 9, therefore I will take back my grain in its time, and my wine in its season, and I will take away my wool and my flax, which were to cover her nakedness. Now I will uncover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and no one shall rescue her out of my hand. Real quick, before we keep going, what does sin look like? If you had to describe sin, what does sin look like? Okay, that's a good one. What else?
This is going to sound really weird. Have you ever seen Spider-Man with Venom and how Venom transforms? That's how I kind of think of it. Whenever it's like that inky black substance that just kind of covers your whole body. and just kind of takes everything over. That's what he
It's like an alien tar.
Yeah.
How you're going to describe sin. That's actually really good.
I mean,
It's not what I'm going to use, but that's good. Fits in with darkness too. What else?
Bad.
Okay, it's bad.
good job, Devin. We're so proud.
Devin's taking the easy stuff off the board for us today, so we don't have to worry about whether or not we should say it. That's nice of Devin. It's messy. Sin is messy. Sin is ugly. You will not see that anywhere more than in the case of studying marriage, divorce, and remarriage. If you want to see how messy and ugly sin is, you start getting into actual cases of what happens whenever people are married, they get divorced, and then they get remarried. Sin happens at some point along the line with a divorce, either before with adultery and the person has a justified means to divorce, or if they don't have a justified means and they divorce, they're sinning in doing that. A divorce doesn't happen without sin. And sin is ugly, sin is messy. It's like sticky black tar you can't get off of you. Sometimes even an alien black tar, I guess. But no, whenever he's talking about taking away the wool and the flax, which were to cover her nakedness, I will uncover her lewdness. If you do something that is shameful, you don't want it to be out in the public light. Unless there's something wrong with your mind, you don't want the wrong things that you do exposed to the entire world. It's embarrassing. You don't want people seeing your shortcomings. In this case, God is going to say, because of your actions, I'm going to take away the good things that were covering that up, and everybody's going to know exactly what you did that's wrong. No one will rescue her out of my hand. No one can go up against God and come out on top. I will put an end to all her mirth, her feast, her new moons, her Sabbaths, and all her appointed feasts. Now, this doesn't sound too bad because these things were all appointed or all told to do in the old law. But they have twisted it and used it for Baal worship. They're not worshiping God the way He said to. They've taken those good things that He said to do, twisted it, and done something sinful with it. And we have to pick up the pace. I will lay waste her vines and her fig trees, of when she said, these are my wages, which my lovers have given me. I will make them a forest, and the beast of the field shall devour them. In other words, all the good things, they're just going to go to waste. I will punish her for the feast days of the balls, when she burned offerings to them and adorned herself with ring and jewelry, and went after her lovers and forgot me, declares the Lord. In Revelation 2:4, we read about a church leaving its first love. And this is what they're talking about. She left her husband, God or Hosea, and then went after her lovers. And she didn't just go after them. She prettied herself up. She put on her rings and her jewelry, and she went out chasing them, trying to seduce them. Therefore, behold, I will allure her. I will bring her back into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. I will give her vineyards and make the valley of Achor a door of hope. And there she shall answer as in the days of her youth, at the time of Egypt when she came out of the land. Whenever the Exodus happened, anybody that was willing to enter into a covenant with God was able to do so. And the same thing happened whenever the church was established. The people that wanted to leave a life of sin were able to go into a new life and enter into a covenant relationship with God. God is tenderly reaching out and trying to woo anyone that wants to out of the world of sin into a covenant relationship with Him. On that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband, and no longer will you call me my Baal, for I will remove the names of the Baals from her mouth, and they shall be remembered by name no more. I will make... All right, let's stop there for a second. It won't even be speaking of. The evil that they did won't even be speaking of. When we leave a life of sin and go into a covenant relationship with God, we have our sins forgiven and we're washed in the watery grave of baptism, and we rise up a new creature that we read about in Romans 6, no more will that sin be held over our head by God. No more will it be on the tip of His tongue. And we should be the same way. If a husband and wife have issues in their marriage, one of them commits adultery, and that person sincerely repents and comes back and says, I will never do that again. I want to be with you the rest of my days. And the person forgives them. The other spouse forgives them. They should not hold that mistake over their head. Okay? There comes a point whenever the sin that was committed in your past, if you are repentant, it should never be spoken of again. Okay, the same way you don't want God holding the sins you did in the past over your head. If someone sincerely repents, you should not hold that sin over their head. Okay, if someone sins and comes back, receive them with open arms. We read about that in 2 Corinthians. I will make for them a covenant on that day with the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens and the creeping things of the ground, and I will abolish the bow, the sword, and war from the land, and I will make you lie down in safety, and I will betroth you to me forever. A covenant relationship with God is a never-ending thing. It's a lifelong endeavor. I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice, in steadfast love and in mercy. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. We are going to go back and hit on some important words right here. Forever, righteousness, justice, steadfast love, mercy, and faithfulness. These are all attributes of God. These are all attributes of God, and you shall know the Lord. The things that God promises to us, that He betroths us to, or betroths us with, are all attributes of His personality. And in that day I will answer, declares the Lord. I will answer the heavens, and they shall answer the earth. The earth shall answer the grain, the wine, the oil. They shall answer Jezreel. I will sow her for myself in the land. I will have mercy on no mercy. I will say to not my people, you are not my people. And he shall say, you are my God. So in this case, the people that were no longer God's people have the opportunity to become God's people again by entering into the church. In the same way we had that opportunity whenever we became Christians. All the good things that God has put in our lives have come from God. And whenever we become a Christian, we have so many more things to be thankful for than when we were not a Christian. Breaking into chapter 3. This is probably, I hesitate to say the most important chapter in Hosea, but it shows us what God is willing to do for us. In chapter 3, and the Lord said to me, go again, love a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love cakes of raisins. That was something they offered to the other gods. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a lethek of barley. And I said to her, you must dwell as mine for many days. You shall not play the whore or belong to another man. So will I also be to you. For the children of Israel shall dwell many days without prince or king, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or household gods. After the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, they shall come in fear to the Lord and to his goodness in the latter days. Okay, so right off the bat, God says to Hosea, go again and love a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel. Even though Hosea had reason to leave his wife and never go back to her, God says, love her. Not just go back to her, but love her, even though she is loved by another man. That is a hard thing to do. Imagine, if you will, that you're married and your spouse has abandoned you for another woman, or Devin, another man, and you're supposed to go to that person, even though they love another person. So Hosea does it, and he's using this as a parallel again for the children of Israel. This is the same way God loves the children of Israel, even though they turn to other gods and they love the cakes of raisins that they offer to those other gods. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a lethek of barley. 15 shekels of silver is the same as 30 pieces of silver, which is the price of a wounded slave. Whenever a slave was wounded by an animal, that was the price that you had to pay for the wounded slave to the slave's owner under the old law. So she has indentured herself to another person, if you will. She's essentially a prostitute slave for another person that she was chasing. And Hosea not only gives the price, but he goes a little bit beyond the price. And let me ask you this. Would you be willing to sink this much money? This was a fair amount of money. Would you sink this much money, plus a little bit more, into someone who had abandoned you and acted like they didn't love you at all? If this was just you on your own without a command of God, your spouse has abandoned you, she is shacking up with another guy, she's been sleeping with every guy she could get a hold of, would you be willing to go back and get her and sink money into getting her back into your life?
Probably not.
No, I would question your sanity a little bit if you did, because she has no desire to be with you. She has left you. But God says to go get her anyway. I said to her, you must dwell as mine for many days. So this is the deal. This is the groundwork that Hosea is laying out that she has to agree to. You have to be mine, dwell as mine for many days. You shall not play the whore or belong to another man. So he requires faithfulness from her. And I think that is a very reasonable request. As a spouse, you're supposed to be faithful to your spouse. So I also will be to you. He promises the same thing. The same way that whenever we promise to be faithful to God, God promises to be faithful to us. For the children of Israel shall dwell many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or household gods. Okay, whenever Israel was destroyed in short order, they went a long time without a king, without a prince, without the sacrifices that they were doing, and without the ephods or household gods, without the idolatry that they had. After that period, the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They shall come in fear to the Lord and to his goodness in the latter days. The ones that wanted to come out of that lifestyle were able to do so at any point because they could go down to Jerusalem and worship God the way they were supposed to, with the exception of when the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians because of Judah's idolatry, and in the church later after that. So imagine, if you will, Hosea goes to, a lot of scholars say she was probably on a slave block being sold whenever he went to go buy her. Imagine, if you will, Hosea goes and he buys his wife back even though she is worthless and she has left him. She is used up by all the other men. She's not worth it anymore, or otherwise the guy that owned her wouldn't have been selling her. He would have kept her. But instead he was selling her and getting rid of her because she was all used up. And in the same way, sin will throw you away whenever sin is done with you. Okay, it'll seem shiny and awesome for a while, but sin will take you and it will trash you whenever it is done with you. Whenever you die, sin is done with you and it wants nothing to do with you, and you're going to go to hell. In this case, Hosea goes and gets her, even though she's not worth it. He sinks the money into her, and that is the same thing that God was willing to do for us. Everybody in here right now is a Christian. God was willing to go and pay a price for us that was not what we were worth. It was so much more than what we were worth whenever he paid the blood of Christ for us. And he was willing to take us, and as long as we agreed to be faithful to us, to enter into a relationship that we didn't deserve because of how we had acted. So in this case, Gomer was someone who had already been in that relationship and had abandoned it. And God was still willing to take her back. Hosea was still willing to take her back. So my question for you guys is, are you Gomer? Have you left God and chased something else? And if you are, you need to get back in that relationship with God. And we'll press for time. If you are not Gomer, if you are still in a relationship with God and you've never left that relationship with God, make a vow to never be Gomer, to never leave God, and to not have to be the one that crawls down off of that slave block of sin again, to enter back into the relationship you never should have left. There's no price that's worth it to leave God, because anything good you have comes from Him. Don't go chasing something else. Does anybody have any comments before we shut down? All right, thanks guys.